welcome to the stage at the Heartland Cafe, and it's still a sunny morning, Flint Taylor, who's with the People's Law Office. And we've actually had a conversation with Flint in recent months about a topic that unfortunately we have not seen the final chapter of, which is the continuing impact of police torture of civilians in the city of Chicago. Otherwise infamously known as the Burge cases. Flint, the current campaign, now that Officer Burge has done his time and is out and living off a pension, I've been in vigorous debates about whether or not he deserves that pension, but you're trying to get, in my mind, what's in effect a pension of sorts for the victims of his torture and his other colleagues who did that, with a reparations fund that the city would set up to help victims of torture. What kind of money are you trying to get? How many people would this affect? And in the midst of this mayoral campaign where the issues come up a little bit on the edges, what do you see happening going forward on it?
Well, the reparations ordinance, as you said, is now in front of City Council. It's stuck right now in the Finance Committee. Ed Burke. We have 28 sponsors, so we have a majority, but we can't get it out of committee right now. We're having a big rally today downtown at the Chicago Temple, 77 West Washington Street, and it's a people's hearing. If we can't get that hearing out of Finance Committee, we're going to have our own hearing. As someone mentioned, Burge got out of jail yesterday. And this Monday I went down to depose him and look him in the eye again. I was down in Tampa. I chased him down, got a subpoena on him, did a deposition on him. And he had a chance. He had a chance to make his own reparations in terms of admitting something, maybe an apology, maybe something that would show that he had some heart. But he sat there, looked me in the eye, and took the Fifth Amendment as I asked him about torture, called me a liar, tried to walk out, and finally we finished the deposition. So Burge is still Burge, torture is still torture, and we need to have reparations. To answer your question a little more directly, there's been $125 million spent in this torture scandal. There's been over $20 million spent just to defend Burge in the cases. The city spent around $90 million. The county spent another 15 or so million. The states spent the rest, and the feds. We've asked for a modest amount, $20 million, which we picked because that's the same amount that Burge got in his own defense, to give reparations to the some 100 or so men, perhaps a few less than that left, who have not gotten any money. We know about the big cases, the ones who were wrongfully convicted, who got big settlements. But that's a minority of the men who've been tortured. Most of them, like Darrell Cannon and Anthony Holmes, either got nothing or a real pittance for their torture. And that's what we're asking for. We're asking for reparations. It's a modest amount if you split 20 million or 10 million or whatever up among 100 people. Now, the rest of the money would go for a South Side center where we would have treatment, psychological treatment, medical treatment. People could get together and deal with the torture. It would be a bit kind of a memorial. There would be history there. Torture would be taught in the public schools. There'd be a formal apology, not the kind of half apology that Rahm has been giving. People would get education and training, the torture survivors. So it's a well-thought-out ordinance. It's sponsored by Howard Brookins, by Joe Moreno, and by none other than Joe Moore of this. They're the main sponsors. But as I said, we have 28 people, and we can go over this cheat sheet at some point about...
We'll come back to this, but I'm curious, what were you deposing Burge about?
Well, there are still several torture cases that some men are still in prison. Other men have not been exonerated. There was a particular case, Alonzo Smith was his name. He was tortured under Burge supervision back in 1983. So we had a court order to go to Florida and to depose him on that case. But as I said, he took the Fifth Amendment. It's in his own interest to do that because if he lies again under oath, he could be prosecuted again, and that's what he was doing time for, not for torture, but for the Al Capone type of offense of obstruction of justice and perjury.
Clearly, the mayor wants this to all go away. I can't help but think that Anita Alvarez would want this to all go away. Has she signed up in support of this reparations bill?
Did you have a little smile on your face when you asked that question? Of course not. We've been chasing Rahm quite a bit. He's been trying to play both sides against the middle because he understands that the African-American community is very concerned about this. This was not just 100 or 120 men who were tortured and have post-traumatic stress disorder. This was an entire community that was terrorized in the sense that you had families, you had mothers, you had relatives, people went to prison. So this is an entire community that's still outraged by what's happened and the fact that we haven't had full justice in these cases. So Rahm, as you know, is a little bit weak in the African-American community. Unfortunately, Karen Lewis wasn't able to take him up on that. But so on the one hand, he doesn't want to say no to us. On the other hand, he doesn't want us to have a hearing. The other candidates, with the exception of Willie Wilson, have supported the ordinance. As I said, 28 aldermen and several challengers in various races have supported the ordinance.
So I'm trying to picture how we bring some kind of a snowplow filled up with something to Alderman Burke's house. Probably not in a snowstorm, but it would be an interesting symbol after his special treatment the last couple of weeks with snow removal in his So help me think through the metaphor of what we would have in the front end of the front loader as we arrive in his front porch.
That's a good question. Maybe we could put Burge in it. Maybe we could put him in the snowplow.
Well, someone have to come up with the airfare to get him up from Florida.
Well, that's true.
So there's really was a culture of abuse that you've been trying to tackle, at least in this one police district. Are there any indications that that has, in fact, changed over the last generation? Are there current cases of torture that you're aware of that we haven't heard about yet, or has that culture under McCarthy or before begun to shift?
I don't think the culture has changed. I don't think that the systemic and racist nature of police brutality has changed. We don't see electric shocking victims on their genitals when they're brought into a police station, at least not in the systemic way they did under Burge. We don't see people being suffocated with bags over their heads to get confessions from them like we did. But we see beatings. We see the kind of psychological torture. We see shootings, of course. We've seen in this city, like all around the country, unjustified shooting of unarmed African-American and other people of color, young men primarily. So the culture hasn't changed. The code of silence hasn't changed. The brutality hasn't changed. But some of the tactics were unique to Burge and his men.
You've given us an interesting polling sheet here. It looks a little different than the ones you might get from the IVI, IPO, or certain ward organizations. Explain who's right on reparations, and let's start with the 5 mayoral candidates. You've already quickly referenced the fact that Willie Wilson is not supportive, but you definitely have Mayor Rahm is not supportive.
That's right.
And the other 3 at this point have been.
Right. Fioretti was a little reluctant, but he did support it and does support it. Same with Chuy Garcia. He was a little late to the game, but he now supports it. And Doc Walls, of course, supports it. Manuel, as I said, he doesn't want to say he doesn't support it, but he will not express support for it. And Willie Wilson, we haven't been able to get any kind of commitment from him either.
Now, you've targeted or highlighted certain aldermen who I take it are not on board yet.
Right.
Anyone in particular that folks should be paying attention to?
Well, on the north side, we have a block of aldermen. We have the 39th through the 41st wards. Not surprisingly, the 2 O'Connors and Loreno do not support. Tom Tunney in the 44th ward doesn't support it, which is troubling.
Tom Tunney also doesn't support a raise in the minimum wage.
Yeah, well, he's kind of gone totally by the wayside from what people kind of hoped about him.
But he loves scoreboards.
Well, that's great now, isn't it? Harry Osterman in the 48th ward has been very wishy-washy and has not supported it.
I'm a little surprised about that. I would have thought that Harry would see this for what it really is. And maybe those of you out there who are in our listening audience who are also in the 48th ward might want to talk to your alderman, because he is basically a pretty nice guy.
Yeah, we have met with him, but he just hasn't been forthcoming and supporting, and we wish he would. And of course, in the 50th Ward, Stone's old ward, Silverstein does not support it.
She's a very conservative legislator.
And there's 3 or 4. There's an interesting race in the 10th Ward. Pope, who of course is pro-police, doesn't support it, but Richard Martinez does. And then there are 3 African-American wards, 7th, 8th, and 9th, which Natasha Holmes, Michelle Harris, and Anthony Beal, none of them support this. But their challengers, LaShonda Curry, Fahim Shabazz, and Ted Williams, they all do. So that's something, I don't know if people are listening from those wards, that's something to take into account when you go to the polls there.
So I've, over the years, particularly in the community development field, have seen lots of ordinances and proposed plans for better affordable housing policies, better targets, sit in committee ad nauseum and never get out, because it either ends up in rules or finance, and they just die. What do you think needs to happen at this point, notwithstanding 28 supporters, to move this legislation out of Alderman Burke's committee?
Well, I think that this rally, this people's hearing today, should hopefully draw a lot of attention to it. There have been several demonstrations, marches. There's a very strong coalition between the people who are seeking reparations and those over the years who have fought against torture, fought against the death penalty, and the younger generation, Project NIA, and some of the other predominantly African-American youth who are so strong with Black Lives Matter and all of those important struggles, have come together and strongly support this. So there's a reckoning to be had here, with not only with all of us old-timers and movement people, but the new generation who are fighting against police brutality and police violence. And it puts Rahm in the position, particularly since he pays lip service to the African-American community, pays lip service to a lot of things that we know that he really doesn't do anything about. It puts him on the fence. He can call this hearing in 30 seconds if he gives Ed Burke the call, and they're not telling us no hearing. They're just, well, I think they want to put it off until after the election now, because there's a real, there's a real fulcrum here before the election. They don't want to be embarrassed by not supporting it, but they don't want to support it either. That's, I think, what we're looking at.
Flint, we're talking with Flint Taylor of the People's Law Office. We've been talking about reparations for the victims of Burge's torture. I'm going to ask you a couple other questions. We have a situation, and they relate to our first guest, Ali Naguib from Illinois Normal, National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws. We have a situation in Chicago where the city council passed, decriminalized, so to speak, marijuana. And instead of putting people in jail, they had an opportunity to pay a fine. That fine was a little high, $250, I believe. You have Ms. Preckwinkle from the county board opposed to that. A number of people have said that it still leaves a lot of non-white, in other words, third world, Latino, black people in jail. What's the current status of that? Has it shifted at all so that, and the other part of it was that they were not giving out those kind of tickets. They were actually putting people in jail still, particularly blacks and Latinos. Has anything changed or shifted on the day-to-day, on-the-ground work with the police around who they bust on marijuana and what happens to them?
I really don't know the answer to that, Michael. I do know that I haven't heard that there's been any kind of shift shift in general on who they harass, who they arrest, who they stop, who they search. I know there's a movement to get another ordinance passed, which would to document the stops and the frisks like they had in New York, and that's how they actually won the stop and frisk case, because they had the documentation. Well,
yesterday they all got cameras, supposedly. Well, the 14th Police District now has cameras. You hit it twice, it's right on your chest, it takes a movie, and supposedly they said all of the police districts are going to have it within the next year. Any thoughts on that?
Well, if you can hit your chest once to turn it off and once to turn it on, we still got some of the same problems, don't we? And I'm involved in a case up in Milwaukee where they supposedly had cameras on the dashboards in some of the cars, but the cars that were doing these illegal strip and body cavity searches of African American men, somehow there were very, very few videotapes of those particular searches. So it could have an effect on brutality. It could have an effect on illegalities by the police if it's closely monitored. But I think that the proof will be in the pudding on that. Before we switch to something else, let me tell your listeners a couple things they can do if they can't make it down to the temple. One is to call
the temple,
the Chicago Temple down at 77 West Washington this afternoon, where the rally is. You can call the mayor's office at 312-744-3300 and say you support the reparations ordinance, or you can tweet at Chicago's mayor, #RAM, R-E-P, now. I know Mike does a lot of tweeting. And
I'm not a tweeter yet.
I'm not either, but they
Facebook,
tell me
email.
that the younger generation tells me that I better tell people to do that.
On a totally different legal issue, but as a citizen of the state, I'd be curious in your reaction to Governor Rauner's effort through executive action to diminish the role of organized labor in the state by refusing to pay the union fee for negotiated contracts. And, of course, the back and forth this week, his own comptroller said she wasn't going to go along with it. And then yesterday he revised his order to do a workaround her refusal to help. He's clearly trying to position this whole issue that Governor Snotwalker originally kind of raised in the country.
Did you call him Snotwalker?
I did, because that's his name, isn't it? To turn this into a Supreme Court issue, which is why I'm bringing it up. I need some legal advice here. What's the governor doing beyond what it seems to be obvious he's trying to do? And what kind of legal standing is he standing on?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of this kind of ALEC type of approach that they're taking across the entire country. The Republicans and the right wing and the Koch brothers that started with Scott Walker and went to Ohio, and now Rauner is the new pretty boy on all of that. And it's very frightening for not only for labor but for all of us. And it's good to see that it's being resisted. Now, in terms of the legal question, I'm not a labor lawyer, but and if you ultimately get to the U.S. Supreme Court, it's certainly a crapshoot. I mean, we got the old 5-4 issue, and the 5 isn't on our side. But on the other hand, you can't lay down and let this happen. I don't know if there's going to kind of movement that formed in Wisconsin will form here on the ground. But this man is obviously completely anti-labor. And what's interesting or scary as well is how tight he is with a certain mayor of the city of Chicago. So he looks and smiles and kind of gives you that soft kind of approach, but he seems to be pretty nasty in what he's doing, particularly with labor. And I think that's going to spread out more to other issues that we care about as well.
Well, we clearly are going to have some battles in this state and in the city. And one of the things that I always want to ask people who are activists in the legal and social justice and the criminal justice system is our state's attorney, Anita Alvarez. And, in my role as the president of the Democratic Party, the 49th Ward, we had her speak to us before she was elected. She certainly sounded much better than she has been in office. I know there are people out there in the political world who are looking for a candidate to run against her. I'm just going to ask you, as someone who's been in the trenches for many years, are there any people that come to mind who you think would make a good state's attorney? And what is your general take on her role in that office and how that affects people in the communities?
Well, to answer the second part of your question first, which is in some ways easier than the second part of your question, first part of your question, the impact of the state's attorney's office hasn't changed very much from the days of Daley through the days of Devine to the days of Alvarez. And sometimes she talks a good game, but most of the time she doesn't even do that. She created a kind of cosmetic wrongful convictions unit, integrity unit. It's done a few good things. I have to give them credit for that. But there's still a great deal of bias and discrimination in effect down at 26th Street. It's not all the state's attorney's fault. I mean, it's the entire prison, school-to-prison pipeline. And mass incarceration and police, you know, it's a whole package. But she's a willing participant in that package. And in terms of who would make a good state's attorney, that's...
What about you?
I think I'd be, in a conflict situation pretty quickly. I don't think I'd want to prosecute too many people. And that's the problem that you have with progressive people. And when you raise it about being state's attorney, it's like asking me, do I want to be a prison warden? And maybe I would reform the prisons from inside, you know. I think that there's a certain amount of impact a good state's attorney can have. Like down in Dallas, they had a pretty good African-American state's attorney. He started to look at cases seriously of people who were wrongfully convicted and not prosecute some of the cases that were being prosecuted before. But it's a deeper problem, as you guys both know, than who is there in the state's attorney. I totally support the idea of voting in somebody that would be more progressive. I thought Suffredin would have been a pretty good state's attorney. I thought maybe Brookins would have been. Unfortunately, they both ran at the same time. I don't see on the horizon right now someone who I'd say, let's draft that person for state's attorney. And I'm not running.
Flint Taylor, we want to thank you for your hard work on reparations and other issues representing folks who may not have a fair share in court otherwise, and good luck in pursuit of this and to the People's Law Office.
And once again, there is a rally today about the whole question of reparations. Is at what address? 77
West Washington, the Chicago Temple.
What time?
1 o'clock to 3 o'clock.
1 o'clock. There's no pro football, maybe a little basketball, but some people may want to go down there.